we found in my dad's journal entries a notation that's marked 1981 in all caps, Carrie/BND/game. And we know BND is bondage. And so when I went in to see the Osage County Sheriff's Office the first night in June, they let me look at the journal because they had found it, and they wanted me to find it. And we knew right away that it's pretty much symbolizes that my father committed sexual abuse against me when I was like two and a half. And there's another notation in there too right after that. Now, in June, then I went in to see my dad the next day, but I wasn't able to confront him at that time. I finally did in October. I did trauma therapy, I did EMDR, and then I went back in and saw my dad in October, and I confronted him with it, and we showed him the journal entry, and we showed him this photo of him. There's a Polaroid that's not been publicized that he took where he's dressed up like a woman, and he's got like long hair, and he's over a doll that he made that's a child, and strangling the doll. And when I saw the photo this summer, I knew that's what he had done to me.
What would you do if the man who raised you, the one who tucked you in at night, turned out to be one of the most twisted serial killers in American history? Would you ever trust your memories again? Or worse, would you start to question your own reflection? This is the story of Carrie Rawson, the daughter of Dennis Rader, the infamous BTK killer. A woman who thought she had a normal life until the mask cracked and everything she believed about love, family, and identity came crashing down. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of the human mind and stories that don't just shock you, but make you think, then you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss an episode. Like what you're hearing, give us a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Now, let's rewind to the morning of February 25th, 2005, when the FBI knocked on Carrie's door, and the world she knew began to collapse.
I was 26. It was February 2005. I'd moved to Michigan out of college, gotten married, been married 18 months, and I had gotten home for Christmas in 2004 with my dad, stayed with my parents, told my dad goodbye, I love you, I'll see you soon. And then 6 weeks later, the FBI knocked on my door in Michigan at the end of February and said, hey, your dad is BTK.
The letter that broke everything. What would you do if your father, your protector, your rock, was arrested as one of the most sadistic serial killers in American history? It's February 25th, 2005. A cold, still morning in Park City, Kansas. Police cruisers idle on a quiet suburban street. Neighbors peek from behind blinds. And inside a modest ranch-style home, a woman watches through trembling fingers as officers lead her father away in handcuffs. Carrie Rawson had always known her father as Dennis Rader, church president, Cub Scout leader, a devoted family man with an unwavering routine lawn on Saturdays, church on Sundays. Nothing extraordinary. If anything, he was too ordinary, too structured. But that day, everything shattered. What she didn't know not then was that her father was the notorious BTK killer, a man who had terrorized Wichita for 3 decades with a pattern of cold, calculated murder. A man who bound, tortured, and killed his victims, then disappeared into everyday life. 4 years, the case had gone cold, until now, and somehow, impossibly, it was her father. To understand the horror Carrie would soon face, we have to rewind, back to the early years, back to when Dennis Rader was simply Dad. Born in 1978, Carrie grew up in the heart of Kansas suburbia. Her father, Dennis, was the kind of man who believed in discipline. He kept lists. He organized everything: his tools, his schedule, his thoughts. Dinner was at 6. Church every Sunday. He worked for the local compliance office, issuing citations for overgrown lawns or abandoned vehicles. He seemed like a man who craved order. A stickler. A little intense. Perhaps. But dangerous. Never. I thought we were the all-American family, Carrie would later say. I loved my dad. I trusted him. He read her bedtime stories. He fixed her bike. He taught her how to parallel park. And when she went away to college, he called often, sometimes too often. He always wanted to know where she was, who she was with, when she'd be home. It felt like overprotection, but it wasn't. Not really. It was control. While Carrie grew up in innocence, Wichita remembered differently. From 1974 to 1991, a serial killer stalked their streets. The BTK killer, short for bind, torture, kill, was a phantom. He would break into homes, sometimes wait 4 hours, then overpower his victims with chilling precision. His victims ranged from children to grandparents. The murders were brutal, personal, and disturbingly ritualistic. And then, he would write letters to the police, notes to the media, taunting, confessing, boasting. Then in 1991, nothing. BTK vanished. Some thought he had died. Others believed he had moved on. But the case went cold until 2004. That's when a letter arrived at the Wichita Eagle, typewritten, with photocopies of crime scene photographs that had never been released. It was signed BTK. He was back, and the city braced itself once more. By this point, Carrie had moved out, married, and was living a quiet life. She hadn't seen anything strange in her father. He still sent birthday cards, still made dad jokes, still asked too many questions. But the idea that he could be responsible for one murder, let alone 10, unthinkable. But Dennis Rader made a mistake. After years of eluding capture, he sent another letter to police. This time, he included a floppy disk. The file had been deleted, or so he thought, but digital forensics found something. Metadata, a username, Dennis, a location, Christ Lutheran Church. Police followed the lead, and the image that began to form was terrifying. Dennis Rader wasn't just a suspect. He fit everything. He lived in Wichita during the murders. He worked in security. He owned the same kind of car spotted near a crime scene. And most chilling of all, his DNA was a near-perfect match to evidence left on one of the victims. But to get a full confirmation, they needed a match, a relative. Unbeknownst to her, the FBI approached Carrie Rawson. They requested a DNA sample for a routine matter. They said. She agreed, not knowing she was about to help expose her father as a monster. The day Dennis Rader was arrested, Carrie was at home with her husband. A knock at the door. 2 agents. A brief explanation. Her father had been taken into custody, charged with murder. She didn't understand. Not yet. She called her mother. What's going on? Her mother sobbed. They think your dad is BTK. It felt like the ground disappeared beneath her. Could it be true? Number. Her father wasn't capable of that. He couldn't hurt anyone. Not like that. Not the man who raised her. The man who taught her to be kind. Who told her bedtime prayers. But the next day, as she watched the news, she saw his face. Her father's mugshot. Cold. Blank. Familiar. And behind him, the words, BTK killer suspect arrested. The letters, the lies, and the double life. How do you grieve a man who's still alive? A man who tucks you in at night then sneaks out to bind and kill. It was no longer a question of if. The evidence was undeniable. The DNA matched. The handwriting matched. The chillingly detailed confessions left no doubt. Dennis Rader wasn't just a suspect. He was BTK. And while the nation reeled in shock, one woman sat silently in her bedroom, phone clutched in her hand, scrolling through articles with shaking fingers. Her father, the man who had walked her down the aisle, was now being unmasked as one of the most sadistic serial killers in American history. For Carrie Rawson, this wasn't just a crime. It was a personal apocalypse. Carrie's memories began to fracture. Every childhood birthday, every vacation photo, every Sunday dinner they were now cast in a sickly, surreal light. Had he killed someone that morning? Had he smiled over dinner with blood still on his hands? It felt like betrayal on a cellular level. I was the daughter of a serial killer, she would later write, but for 26 years, I was just his daughter. What stunned investigators the most was the ordinary nature of his life. Dennis Rader was no recluse. He didn't live off the grid. He was deeply embedded in his community president of the church council, a code compliance officer, a husband, a father. He coached Little League. He wrote poetry. He installed Christmas lights with military precision. But at night, he transformed. He called it the Factor X, a dart drive, a compulsion. He said it came from an insidious urge to control, to dominate, to make someone disappear. And he fed it methodically, ritualistically. He planned his murders for weeks, sometimes months. He referred to his victims as projects. He kept notes, souvenirs, photographs. It was a life of order, masking a world of chaos. Rader's hunger for recognition never faded. Even during his decades-long silence, he fantasized about writing again. In 2004, it was the anniversary of one of his killings that reignited something in him. He felt forgotten, irrelevant, so he reached out with a letter to the Wichita Eagle. He included copies of a driver's license and photos from a crime scene, things only BTK could have had. What followed was a twisted correspondence between Rader and police puzzles. Codes, cereal boxes left as clues, dolls positioned like his victims, and finally, the fatal floppy disk. Before sending it, Rader had asked police in one of his notes, "Can a floppy be traced back to me if it's used in a church computer?" They replied in the newspaper, no. He believed them. That mistake would bring down a 31-year killing spree. When authorities narrowed their suspect to Dennis Rader, they still needed confirmation. That's where Carrie came in unwittingly. She had recently gone to the doctor, and the FBI found a way to obtain her pap smear sample from a medical facility. They tested it against semen DNA from one of BTK's crime scenes. It was a match. Not Carrie herself, but her biological link to the killer was undeniable. This was his daughter. The scientific news tightened. They watched him for days, confirming patterns, tracking behavior. And then, on February 25th, 2005, they pulled the trigger. He was arrested just blocks from his home. 2 weeks later, in jail, Dennis Rader wrote to his daughter. Carrie stared at the letter, still sealed in its envelope. Her hands trembled. The handwriting was unmistakable. She hadn't responded to calls. She hadn't visited. But now, this letter sat between them like a loaded weapon. She opened it. Inside, fatherly concern, not remorse, not apology. Instead, he wrote about his routines, his faith. He asked how she was sleeping. He told her how much he loved her. Signed it, love, Dad, always. He never mentioned the murders. Never said the words, I did it. Because in his mind, he was still in control, still managing his image, still writing a script where he was both killer and loving father. Carrie's mother, Paula, filed for divorce almost immediately after the arrest. She never visited him in jail. Not once. She vanished from the public eye. Carrie stopped using her last name. She lived in fear, not of her father anymore, but of the judgment, the whispers, the press. People thought I must have known, she said. But how could I? How could anyone? Dennis Rader had spent years perfecting his mask. Inside the mind of BTK, when the detective asked him how he selected his victims, Dennis Rader didn't flinch. He leaned forward and said, I would troll, just to drive around, look for someone vulnerable. It was the kind of answer that makes your blood go cold. No stammer, no remorse, no flicker of hesitation. Just a calm, measured confession, as if he were explaining how to choose a watermelon at the grocery store. Inside the sterile walls of an interrogation room in Sedgwick County Jail, investigators finally came face to face with the man who had haunted Kansas for over 3 decades. The man who called himself BTK. The interview tapes, now infamous, began with an officer asking Rader a simple, open-ended question. "Can you walk us through it?" Rader nods, his face unreadable. His voice is slow, deliberate. "Well, it started in January '74, the Oteros. 4 of them." He leans forward, adjusts his cuffs, and begins to describe in nauseating detail how he broke into the Otero family's home, how he bound 11-year-old Joseph Jr. with cords from the Venetian blinds, how he tried to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. "It didn't go as planned," he says with a faint, unsettling smirk. He describes each murder as a project, a mission with objectives, tools, and an execution strategy. He kept binders full of notes, maps, Polaroids, drawings. One was labeled the hit kit, a bag containing rope, tape, knives, gloves, plastic sheets, and a mask. He carried it with him whenever he went trolling, his word for stalking potential victims. He used terms like Prio, hit Tom, and dump site cold, clinical phrases that stripped away the humanity of the people he hunted. When asked how he selected victims, he said, "I looked for someone alone, female, usually a house with a window air conditioner. Those are easy to pop." The detective sat in stunned silence, because this wasn't a man who snapped. He didn't kill in rage or out of desperation. He planned. He fantasized. He enjoyed it. At one point, officers brought out a box. Inside were hundreds of photographs Rader had taken, not just of his victims, but of himself, dressed in women's clothing, wearing masks, bound to chairs, or lying in open graves he had dug himself, simulating the positions of the people he murdered. He had tied himself up, gagged himself, hung himself from tree branches and rafters with elaborate rope systems, then photographed the scene with a timer. It was performative. It was obsessive. And most disturbingly, it was rehearsed. In his fantasy world, he was both the predator and the prey, the killer and the killed. During the interrogation, one of the detectives asked him, "What do you think your daughter would say if she were here right now?" Rader didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "I hope she'll remember the good times, as if they could balance out the horror, as if school lunches, birthday cards, and father-daughter dances could somehow eclipse a lifetime of blood." It was during the confession of the 1985 murder of Maureen Hedge, a woman who lived just 6 doors down from the Rader family, that one of the officers finally had to excuse himself. Rader described how he had waited until his wife left town. Then he'd attended church, led a scout meeting, and told his daughter he was going to bed early. He sneaked out of the house with his hit kit. Hours later, he brought Hedge's body back to his own church, Christ Lutheran, and staged her for photos in the basement where his daughter had once attended Sunday school. "I wanted a different setting," he said. That was the moment even seasoned detectives couldn't hide their disgust. One stood up, left the room, and reportedly said in the hallway, "He's not human." When Dennis Rader appeared in court for the first time, the press braced for theatrics. Instead, he calmly stated his name, confirmed his plea, guilty, and proceeded to read, from a yellow legal pad, a clinical list of every murder, describing how he chose the victims, how he gained entry, and how he put them down. He used the phrase "terminated the project." He called them number 1 through number 10. At one point, he even corrected the prosecutor on a date. The room was ice cold. A mother sobbed into her hands. A brother of one victim clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. And all the while, Rader spoke like a man giving a seminar. The sentence, the silence, and the scars left behind. He stared straight ahead as if he were watching someone else's movie and blinking, unmoved while the families of his victims read from blood-stained memories. July 27th, 2005. The courtroom was standing room only. It wasn't just the sentencing of Dennis Rader, this was the final reckoning. After 3 decades of terror, 10 confirmed murders, and a double life hidden in plain sight, the community of Wichita, Kansas, was about to confront the man who had haunted them in whispers and nightmares. And in the pews, clutching a folded letter in her hands, sat his daughter. "May God have mercy on your soul." The judge's voice rang out at the end of a harrowing 6-hour hearing. Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, maximum penalty allowed under Kansas law at the time, since the state did not have the death penalty when most of the murders were committed. No possibility of parole for 175 years. But it wasn't the sentence that shook the room. It was everything that came before. One by one, family members stepped forward to speak. Some brought photos. Some brought trembling hands. All brought pain that had aged into something quiet and razor sharp. Charlie Otero, the only surviving member of the Otero family, looked Rader in the eye and said, "You destroyed a family. You didn't just kill them. You killed me too. Every day since 1974. I've been in a prison you built." He had been 15 years old when he came home from school to find the lifeless bodies of his parents and to younger siblings. He never recovered. "I used to dream of shooting you myself," Charlie said, voice breaking. "Now I just want you to rot." Others followed. A sister who lost her best friend. A son who missed his mother's last breath. And in every statement, one name kept surfacing again and again in anger, but in sorrow. Carrie, his daughter. Carrie Rawson hadn't spoken publicly until now. For months, she had been hiding from the press, from former classmates, even from herself. The media had labeled her BTK's daughter as if her name had always been written in blood. But she was just 26 years old, newly married, trying to build a life. And now, she was Rader's daughter. She never gave a courtroom statement, but years later, she would reveal what she almost said that day in a letter she wrote and never sent. "Dad, I forgive you, but I don't know who you are anymore. I still hear your voice when I close my eyes, but now it says things I can't repeat. You didn't just kill those people, you killed us too." Carrie had grown up in a small white house with a swing set in the backyard. She remembered camping trips, pancakes on Saturday mornings, a father who helped her with math homework and gave lectures on being safe. "Don't talk to strangers," he used to say. "Lock your doors at night." Now she realized those rules were never meant to protect her from the outside world. They were meant to protect her from him. She once asked her mother, Paula, the question no child should ever have to ask: did he ever hurt us? Or watch us like he did those other women? Paula went pale. She said she didn't know. They would never really know. Dennis Rader was placed in El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he now lives in solitary confinement, spending 23 hours a day alone in a concrete cell. He is allowed a Bible, some books, and writing materials. He occasionally corresponds with criminologists and journalists. In one letter, he wrote, "I am at peace with my past. God and I have come to terms." He refers to his killings as if they were events in a dream. Once, when asked what he'd say to the families if given a chance, he replied, "I'd ask for forgiveness, but I know I don't deserve it, even in prison." His tone is unsettling, measured, cold, calculated, as if emotion was something he studied, but never learned to feel. After the sentencing, Carrie moved away, changed her last name, cut off contact. It would be years before she spoke publicly, and even then, she did so not as a daughter of a serial killer, but as a survivor. I had to grieve the man I thought raised me. I buried my dad, even though he's still alive. She remembers the way he hugged her at her wedding, the way he cried when she graduated, and the way she now wonders if any of it was ever real. He wasn't just a people, she said. He was 10. 10 families, 10 lives, 10 stories, and I carry all of them. Letters from Hell carries awakening and the shadow of legacy. You don't get to choose the blood in your veins, but you can choose what you do with it. For months after the sentencing, Carrie Rawson tried to disappear. She deleted social media. She stopped answering the phone. She and her husband moved into a quiet apartment across the state line. Even then, the weight of her name followed her like an invisible stain only she could feel on her skin. But anonymity doesn't last forever. Not when your father is BTK. And especially not when he won't stop writing to you. It arrived on a Wednesday. There was no return address. No indication of where it had come from, just her name written in that familiar, blocky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. Hi, Pumpkin. It's Dad. I think about you every day. I'm doing okay. I pray you are too. I've been working on some puzzles to pass the time. Remember the ones we used to do. Love you always. Dad. No apology. No explanation. Just a small talk. Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't shattered her world and then mailed her the pieces. She stared at the letter for hours, her hands trembling. Then she burned it. But it wouldn't be the last. Every few months, another one would arrive. Sometimes it was a postcard. Sometimes it was several pages. Occasionally, he enclosed newspaper clippings about books on serial killers or theological reflections on forgiveness. In one letter, he wrote, "God forgives me. I hope one day you can too." In another, he casually mentioned the tales of his murders. "You remember when we went hiking in the woods by Park City? That's where I buried the kill kit from Nancy Fox." As if he was sharing a childhood memory, as if she had been a part of it all along. Carrie was caught in a private civil war. One side of her rational, wounded adult wanted to sever all ties, to legally change her name, to erase him completely from her life. But the other side of the little girl who once rode on her father's shoulder still wondered, was it all a lie? Or was there some part of him that really loved me? Therapists called it coercive trauma bonding, the psychological scars left by years of affection, woven into control, normalcy masking the monstrous. And yet, Carrie didn't want to be a victim. Not anymore. So she made a decision that would change everything. She would speak. In 2014, 9 years after her father's arrest, Carrie Rawson gave her first public interview to ABC News. The lights were harsh. The microphones closer than she expected. Her hands were sweating as the cameras rolled. The first question hit like a hammer. "Do you still love your father?" She paused, swallowed hard. "I loved who I thought he was. But that man doesn't exist. The man who raised me died the day BTK was caught." Her voice never cracked, but her eyes told a different story. In 2019, she released a memoir, A Serial Killer's Daughter, My Story of Faith, Love, and Overcoming. The pages were raw, unfiltered. She didn't spare herself, or him. She wrote about the anxiety attacks, the isolation, the anger. She described a moment in therapy when she screamed for 20 minutes straight just to release the noise in her head. And she wrote about forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. "I forgive myself for not seeing it. I forgive myself for loving him." Not everyone saw her as a victim. Some accuse her of profiting off tragedy. Others believe she was lying, that she had to have known something. "He tucks you in at night, and you never notice the darkness. How do you live in a house built on death?" She tried to ignore them, but the words stuck like thorns. She once wrote in her journal, "I'm not just living with grief. I'm living in the aftermath of someone else's evil, and the world expects me to carry it quietly." Carrie once described her father's crimes as a spiritual infection, something that passed through the walls of their home, invisible but devastating. There were no bloodstains, no screams, just secrets. He kept them buried, and so did we. But now, she was done burying. She began speaking at universities, victim advocacy groups, law enforcement panels, not as BTK's daughter, but as Carrie, a woman reclaiming her voice from the man who had stolen so many others. Years after his sentencing, investigators released portions of Dennis Rader's writings, what he called his projects. They included maps, drawings, diagrams of houses. One was labeled Daughter's Room Entry Method, back window. Another described how he avoided ever harming her. Too risky. Loved her too much. But fantasy still present. Carrie read that line once and then vomited. She never read the rest. The mirror doesn't lie, final reflections from a daughter in the dark. People look at me and say I resemble him. I look in the mirror and wonder what if they're right. Carrie Rawson. From her journal, 2015, is a question that haunted her for years. Not what her father had done, but who she might have been had she been born with one small thing different. One twist of DNA, one moment of inherited darkness. When the world knows your father is BTK, you start to wonder, how much of him is in me? Every now and then, Carrie would find herself reacting sharply, snipping at her husband, getting lost in routines, needing everything to be just so. She hated it, because those were his patterns. Dennis Rader's life was ruled by control. Every step, every crumb, was plotted in tidy columns of notebooks, labeled in chilling detail. And Carrie had inherited the same obsession with order. Was that just personality, or something deeper? I used to think evil was something outside of us, something you could fight. But now I wonder, what if it lives beside your kindness? Buried in quiet, Carrie did something her father never could. She let people see her brokenness. She spoke openly about therapy, medication, depression, faith crises, and guilt. She confessed to being terrified of having children, worried about what she might pass down. And when her daughter was finally born, she cried harder than she ever had. I promised myself, this child will never feel the cold silence I grew up with. I will give her light, even if I have to borrow it from strangers. At one point, Carrie drafted a letter to her father. She never mailed it, but she read it once, into a recorder, as part of a podcast interview. "Dear Dad, you destroyed lives. You destroyed your own family. I refuse to carry your legacy any longer. I will not hide. I will not flinch. I will not forgive what is unforgivable. But I will love myself in the places you taught me to be afraid. You are no longer my story. I am." As the years passed, BTK faded from headlines but never from culture. He became a character in true crime documentaries, in Manhunter, in books and college lectures. People speculated about his psychology, his upbringing, his possible future crimes if he hadn't been caught. But rarely did they ask, what about the people who loved him before they knew? What about the daughter who hugged him goodnight the same week he murdered someone else? What does her healing look like? Dennis Rader still writes letters. He receives fan mail, prison visitors, requests from true crime writers looking for insights. He signs some of his letters "Your Friend," BTK. Others he signs "Dad." In 2023, police reopened several cold cases crimes Rader may have committed decades earlier. Carrie cooperated with investigators, offering insight, locations, timelines, anything she could. When asked if it re-traumatized her, she replied, "Yes, but if I can help give one family answers, it's worth it." She had become, in every way, the opposite of what he was. People ask me if I still think about him. I do, but not with love, not even with hate. I think about him like I think about a storm that nearly killed me. He didn't get to decide who I became. I did. Carrie Rawson is not just the daughter of a serial killer. She is a writer, a survivor, a mother, an advocate, a woman who stood in the ruins of her past and built something no one expected, a future. You wake up one day, and the man who raised you, the man who taught you to ride a bike, who read you bedtime stories, is exposed as one of the most sadistic serial killers in American history. The world wants to turn your pain into entertainment. People call you a liar, or worse, an accomplice. Strangers want to hear your version, but judge you for telling it. Could you survive that? Could you forgive yourself for not knowing? And most haunting of all, if your reflection looked like his, would you ever trust it again?